Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the next installment of GOG's Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access, the IDEA Commitment Education Program. I'm Dr. Rob Coleman. I'm Special Advisor to the President for GOG Partners and a gynecologic oncologist from Texas Oncology. I'm thrilled to be joined today by my friends and colleagues, Dr. Vicki Bejump and Dr. Amanda Jackson, for our discussion today on study conduct and accountability. Dr. Bejump, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Vicki Bejump. I'm a GYN oncologist and a translational researcher at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and also from the UNC Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Center. So very honored to be here today.
Thank you so much. Welcome. Dr. Amanda Jackson, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Amanda Jackson. I'm a gynecologic oncologist at the University of Cincinnati. And I have the pleasure of serving on our phase 1 research team. And I'm honored to be here as well. Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining us today. The GOG Foundation would, of course, like to thank ImmunoGen and GSK for their support of this initiative. This is so important to us. We're so passionate about it, and we've got a lot to discuss today. I'm just so pleased that you both could join me in this discussion. And so without further ado, let's get started. We're going to provide some perspective on the IDEA commitment to clinical research. And I think it's becoming, first of all, I think this is really timely. It's becoming much more of a present issue for us in our discussions with our patients, with our local research teams, in our process of writing clinical trials, but also in our helping industry meet the important requirements now that have been set out by our government to provide the best access for patients, providing diversity in clinical trials, as well as helping to accelerate that enrollment for our sponsors, our friends that are helping us to bring new drugs, new approaches to treatment to our patients. You know, it's been interesting to watch this develop. There have been numerous attempts to bring diversity into the clinical trial for federally funded research. There have been several acts that have been passed through Congress to broaden not only the expansion for women in clinical trials, but also for different age and disenfranchised groups into clinical trials. And we're now kind of using this legislation, which is present here, which was part of the original DPICT Act, which was part of the federal the Food and Drug Administration Omnibus Reform Act of 2022, which brought to the forefront the requirement now for providing not only the prospective plan to increase and broaden diversity in clinical trials, but also the requirement now to file these with new investigational drug applications before the confirmatory trials for our new drug development programs to be initiated. And while this became a nice to have, it's now a need to have. And so as we're still working through this specific legislation, this act did put into motion a public document, which has now been open for comment and is continuing to be revised and augmented as it works its way through our legislation. But the real importance of this is getting back to what I mentioned at the very beginning, and that's how do we bridge the gap between discovery and actual new medicines that are effective for our patients? And our patients come from a diverse background. So as many people know, the process of running a clinical trial kind of follows this graphic here. I like to use this as kind of just a template. What you see on the left are the number of sites that are participating in the clinical trial. On the bottom, you see the time that it's taking to enroll the trial. And then on the right-hand side, you see the scale for the number of patients enrolling into the trial. And we typically see this kind of hockey puck or hockey stick, not puck, hockey stick type of enrollment curve where you can see that as the sites are activating, very few phages are put on because this is the time period when sites are getting through all of their processes to start identifying patients. And then you get through this kind of consistent time period where most of the sites are open, and they're all accruing at about a pretty consistent rate of around 0.2. We hoped as high as 0.3, but around 0.2 patients per site per month. And you can see that the duration of the trial to meet a targeted enrollment will basically is just simple math. And we've tried to impact these curves. It's very difficult to do so just because the natural history of just cancer patients in general. But you can see that you get to this relatively flat slope until you get to the end, where we start to then kind of curtail enrollment because we don't want to over-enroll the trial. But as we think about this kind of enrollment curve for standard trials, there's a tremendous opportunity for us if we can not only accelerate the time to get sites open, but once they're open, do a better job of enrolling them. And this becomes really important in the context of the diversity plan, because if we enroll patients that are not reflective of the general population for which we're studying, this then leads to either a delay in this enrollment time period or a requirement for having to repeat or do a different study to focus on a specific population. So optimizing clinical trial enrollment and optimizing the diversity component of that provides a tremendous opportunity to bring new drugs to our patients in a more expeditious fashion. So these diversity plans now are part of, as I mentioned, the formal requirement of filing the investigative new drug application. This typically comes up during the time period when a phase 3 confirmatory trial is being developed. And there are many elements now that need to be filed with the IND. So these now are formal documents that are being drafted by my colleagues here and others that are participating in clinical research. And I won't read through every single line here, but I do want to use this as a kind of the basis for discussion, because there are about 5 elements that are really important, and they make sense. Right. So first, there's the first part of the actual document is discuss like the overall condition that we're trying to study, to look at the trials that support that with respect to safety, and what are the kind of the components that will be evaluated during the trial. The kind of the meat of this is really what are your strategies to make sure that, like I said, that the trial population actually reflects the disease and the stage and the indication for which the clinical trial is being done. And so we've seen lots of examples of where this wasn't met, where we had essentially a 98% or 95% Caucasian or white population in a trial, which didn't represent the actual disease of indication. That became very problematic. So I want to know, what are your strategies for that? We'll talk about that here in just a minute. And then how you're going to monitor it along the way, not only for the trial, but also externally for our regulators. So this Diversity Act of 2023 now has a very more nuanced potential components to what I just mentioned. A lot of this has to do with how this process will be happening, how you're going to be recruiting and retaining these trial participants, and meeting these retention goals. And actually, having been part of some of these trials now, it's been really interesting to see, for what used to be kind of a retrospective review, hey, how did we do? Now to something that's much more proactive, like how are we doing? And we're seeing these in our kind of our very timely regular study updates, where we're looking at the type of patients that are going into the trial and making sure that we're adhering to the processes that we had set forth in the beginning. So with that, as you can see here, these are the kind of the elements of this, and we'll get into this. I just wanted to have this available to people who are watching so they can go back and review this. But let me start our discussion today about eligibility. This obviously is part of the thing of trying to increase enrollment. But let me ask Dr. Beijump, and I'm gonna go casual here. So I'm gonna call you Vicky and Amanda. Okay, if that's all right. It's gonna be too hard for me to keep remembering. And that's my natural style anyway. So let me, for both of you, we all are writing clinical trials, and we start those clinical trials, at our early on in in our kind of our clinical trial path by doing investigator-initiated trials. And writing eligibility seems like something that should come very easy. And I can tell you, having done this myself, that sometimes it's just cut and paste from other protocols because the other protocols made it through. And unfortunately, that's a big problem. So tell me a little bit about eligibility, how you go about it. So let me ask you first, Vicki, about, what are the processes that kind of go through your mind when you're writing a trial when you're considering the eligibility?
Yeah, and it's a good point, because you're right. We do think about a lot of cut and pasting. And I will also say, as a translational researcher, I'm like so interested in biomarkers and biospecimens and things that sometimes you just have to remember that actually patients enrolled in these trials do have to meet all of these goals that we put in the trial. So I do think it's important that we spend a little bit more time than we have in the past, really looking at the eligibility criteria, making sure it's broad, making sure it's not too burdensome. Like, for example, not too many blood draws, that we're enrolling kind of most, kind of a patient population that reflects everyone that we're treating out there in the real world. And so instead of making our group too homogeneous, which I think is what we've done in the past, we really have to kind of broaden those goals, let as many folks in as we can. And like I said, really pay attention to what we're asking people to do. And as a scientist, I want lots of biospecimens, lots of blood draws, but in reality, we also want to enroll and have many, many diverse folks in our trials as well. So we have to kind of balance those two goals.
Yeah, excellent. Amanda, how about you? What kind of things go through your mind in developing eligibility criteria?
I think for every item on our eligibility criteria, we truly need to ask ourselves, is needed? Because we have previously tried to make as, the healthiest, best population, and that's not so that we can have the, for our outcomes of clinical trials, trying to get the best response. But we truly need to think about our disease and what that disease looks like and what health problems come with that disease. And that's what should be reflected in our eligibility criteria. We shouldn't exclude people that need to receive this treatment in the future. So really looking at item by item and then trying to eliminate things that are going to be barriers for people to enroll in the clinical trial.
Right. And, I think that we all are, we know what the hypothesis is, at least I hope we do. It's very clear to get that done. And then, then we start crafting, the types of patients. And like I said, there's a boiler template a lot of us will use because, it's made it through other trials. And I think that's kind of where you almost need to kind of stop and think about that because, one of those are age restrictions, right? Sometimes we see that as being, the too young or too old. The issues of prior disease and how that might affect the outcome, concomitant medications, a prior history of cancer. These things they're common because they're narrowing on the focus of what you're trying to study, but are they required? It's like, do they negatively impact what the question you're trying to address? I think that's the key thing is, and to me, it becomes really evident when you start to build out the schedule of events. As you mentioned, Vicki, you said, well, I want to have blood, tissue, and other fluids at every point during every week, or PKs done, every hour, because that gives us the most granular data and provides the most opportunity going questions. And there are trials that we write where that's really important because it's material to the hypothesis. But in general, with our large, kind of phase 3 late stage trials, those kinds of things just get carried forward. And so I like it at this point in time is to basically question, do I need this? Is this appropriate? And yeah, maybe it's on the exclusion side of things where, should this be an exclusion? I think, we have made some progress on personal prior history of cancer. I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts about that? Why is that such you see it in every single trial. There's like, you can't have a prior history of cancer within 3 years or within 5 years, or, they'll allow, skin malignancies. Why do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think looking at like how close that treatment is and what treatments there are, like skin cancers obviously are very different and most of it's surgically treated. So, and yeah, I think we have to be more careful about that because
Yeah.
you're right. Sometimes too, having a risk of cancer puts you at a risk of other cancers, right? And so,
Mhm.
you know,
And
need
I think
to, yeah.
And also, I think whether or not that cancer, what's the likelihood of that cancer recurring or causing other issues? If someone has like an incidental stage 1A cancer found, but we don't think that it would come back and it's not going to impact this clinical trial,
Mhm.
it's hard to think about how many patients are excluded for like an early thyroid cancer that was already treated a year ago. And is it going to impact what's going to be happening moving forward? I mean, it's a big difference with someone who has like 2 active, very aggressive cancers. But if we don't think that that cancer is going to impact the outcomes of this study, we would try not to exclude those patients.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And again, in the context of diversity, so not just inclusion, but in context of diversity, there are certain ethnic groups that have propensity to different malignancies, and so I think those are conditions that we need to consider. To me, it's really about whether or not it will confound either the tolerance of the drug, if this is a drug study, or it will confound the endpoint. Is there,
Yeah.
if an event happens, since most of these trials are event-based, is that event due to the prior history or is it an event due to the condition under study? And so I can see, so there's value in doing this, but also we don't want to overstretch that issue. And so I think it's, again, I just wanted to highlight that, and as part of inclusion, and equal access, that it's important that we consider those eligibility and exclusion criteria very carefully. Here's some ideas here. Older adults. I think that's I remember very often it was an 18 to 70. And I was like, oh gosh, that's getting close to the median age of many of our cancers. And we exclude most of our patients. But you can see these extremes in weight ranges, HIV, which is another big deal. Children, as part of these DAPs that are put together for a clinical trial, they really want these. It's okay if you have a legitimate reason to exclude these potential patients that could have the disease under indication, but they want to know why. And I think one of the ones that was kind of an automatic was this concomitant illness, especially for HIV. This was a real problem. I remember as we were sorting out trials in cervical cancer, because we saw there was this linkage to the diagnosis of AIDS in patients who had HIV and cervix cancer. Now that's been excluded, or been retracted, so that's good for us. And children, of course, in our age, many of the cancers that we deal with outside of germ cells, ovarian cancer, and some other cancers like cervical cancer that we see, we really don't have a general population of children, but certainly in these DAPs, they want those addressed. What about this lower part here? Issues with mental disabilities, non-English speakers. What are the kind of the accommodations that we try to make for these other potential disenfranchised populations? Amanda, let me start with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, making sure, for non-English speakers, that should be very easy and straightforward for us. We should be able to have consents and be able to provide information to patients in their own language, and make it that you don't have to speak English to be on the clinical trial. That's, I think, the easiest one for us to cross that barrier.
Yeah, and I think when you think what it was like 146 different languages, how many of these, with the cost of doing a translation for consent can be pretty expensive. I think it was like $1,500 for me. That becomes a burden at the local site level. But what other strategies have you guys used for addressing this non-English speakers to participate? Vicki, anything at your site?
Well, I think, we do try to at least, you're right, it's hard to have consents in every language out there. We do try to make sure that we do have a Spanish consent, because I think
Mhm.
that's like, I think Amanda said, kind of the low-lying fruit there for,
Yeah.
and so I think that's the easiest one. And then I think we need to start thinking about some of the other languages like French and things. It's hard to hit everyone's languages, but I think hitting the big ones is really important.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, I think that we've run across this as well, that consent documents that are in native language are much better than doing the translations, which are available and can be, there are mobile language devices that can be used to do real-time consenting. But it's hard to send a patient home with a consent. It's in English and not in native language. We have I have some very, very impressive examples of where we went back to the sponsor and said, "Hey, listen, we have a a person, a patient who wants to participate. It's a good candidate by other causes, but doesn't have a consent in that native language." And I've been able to do one-off translation. And it wasn't an easy um, one to do. It was going to be costly, but the sponsor ultimately agreed to do that, which was very fortunate, so we could get this patient on a clinical trial. What about just most people work during the middle of the day, and most people have to travel to get to the site. We have childcare responsibilities with both genders. These are, kind of barriers. How do you guys tackle something like this, or how do you recommend, sponsors tackle something like this when they're putting together a clinical trial?
I think, and Amanda might have mentioned this before, I think it's like looking really closely at that time and events table. And
Mhm.
when I do it, I feel like earlier in my career, I was very stringent about that time and events table. Now I like give lots of leeway for each of those so we can accommodate something that comes up, a work schedule, because, does it always have to be one day after something, right? And so I think
Mhm.
really paying a lot of special attention to that. I think
Mhm.
we do also think about gas cards and, thinking about housing nearby, like, like we have a SECU house and things like that, trying to troubleshoot any of those kind of barriers that are make it hard for folks to do clinical trials. So those are, I guess, a couple of things.
Mhm.
One other thing that I think we're increasingly doing is actually having patient advocates actually look at the time and events table, the eligibility and those sort of things, because sometimes our patient advocates can see things that we can't see. And so I think that also kind of has helped me troubleshoot some of our protocols as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Amanda, what kind of advice do you provide to sponsors about increasing the opportunity for patients who are not like around the medical center to come in?
Yeah, I think, we would have to realize that things cost time and money, and both of those, time is money too. So really thinking about how many times do we really need to see people and follow up, and what those things, what that timeline should look like Vicky mentioned. And then also, like, how does that follow-up need to be? Like, does it truly need to be in person, or can it be, like a televisit, or could someone else on the staff, meet with the patient closer to them, like at their home base when patients are traveling far in to come for these clinical trials. So really trying to minimize the burden for patients, and then how can we do that? Like you said, if you've got through your cancer treatment, but you now are back at work and you only have so much time you can take off, how could we help patients give us the follow-up that we need so that we can continue to include them in the trial, but meet them on their
Mhm.
side? And maybe televisits or nursing phone calls or something like that could help.
Yeah,
Boy,
labs locally or anything that can be done locally is a good thing. And
boy,
yeah,
yeah. Well, isn't that but the kind of the maybe the only good thing that came out of COVID
Yeah.
was the
Yeah,
reliance on decentralizing not only care, but even the administration of some of the standard of care medications.
yeah.
Yeah, that has been a huge difference from just to think back before, it's like before COVID and after COVID. So before COVID, this was like, on the fringes of like what was acceptable. the big unknown, and now became a necessity. And now I think it's become much people are much more comfortable with it. Actually, just the quality of the data are just so much better now. There's not so many missing values. I think
Mhm.
that's key, especially for quality of life assessments and other aspects of that, just of tolerance of therapy while on treatment. Let me jump here to the next slide about the exclusions. We talked a little bit about this. One of the things I've felt, again, going back to the schedule of events, was on trials that required, or there was a sense that they required detailed PK and PD measures. And obviously, PD measures are important for understanding at the tissue level or at the biological level the impact of therapy on specific endpoints, and those are important. I don't want to minimize that at all. And part of that development process, going through the early stage development for clinical research, does involve knowing whether or not the dose is optimized. And some of that dose optimization actually requires us to assess what's happening at the tissue level. Those PK, PD, and pharmacodynamic and pharmacokinetic components are critical to make sure that we have the appropriate dose to go forward in a late stage trial. But once that's done, it becomes very onerous to continue to keep doing that. And there are reasons to do population PKs. Obviously, if you do a phase 1 trial and you have like 18 patients total, you don't really have a big sample of the general populations. You definitely have to do these types of things. But it is very difficult, and will be a tremendous barrier to a patient who has to come in for, let's say, a 8-hour PK. They come in the morning. It occupies, a chair or that person in the waiting for a whole day to get a value which may not be necessary. So how do you guys, assess that, the need, or, because obviously there's this conflict between wanting to know and what's practical. So how do you tackle that?
I think like you said, we still need to use some of that information.
Mhm.
And what I tend to do now, I have a phase 1 investigator initiated trial that I have up and going, is really trying it to make it part of that first cycle only. And so
Mhm.
that's what I can say. The first cycle is going to be tough. We're going to have a bunch of lab values we're going to draw. Of course, we're going to try to minimize how many times we do it. But then after that, you just come in and get your treatment. To try to really focus it on just like kind of that first treatment being tough, and then the rest being more kind of standard of what we got and what we do. Come in and get your treatment and get to go home after that. So
Mhm.
that's one way I've tried to tackle it. And I think you'll get most of the information you need. So
Yeah, agreed. What about this last bullet here on the bottom about adaptive trial designs? Amanda, what kind of things do we have the opportunity to kind of be smarter about how we design our trials, so we don't have to, basically say, well, we have to do this to everybody? Is there an opportunity to kind of narrow that, get to what our endpoints are quicker, and then move on to kind of the next stage?
I think you can think about having just a portion of the population that we're collecting all this information on.
Mhm.
And then, like you said, once we have enough, people that represent the population that we've collected the data, that we then remove it from the clinical trial and then run it without people getting all of those lab values. We see that a lot in like early phase clinical trial designs, that the first patients
Right.
have all of these like PK levels and things. And then after that, we reach that threshold, then the stringency and the time commitment from the clinical trial decreases significantly.
Yeah, and I bring this up now. I mean, obviously these are nice to have, or really can be thought through, clearly on investigator-initiated trials. This is kind of our perspective on this. But as we get involved with industry on early asset development from that standpoint, this is some important guidance that we can provide to them as well. That there are ways to rethink about how we do early stage development to identify and hit those kind of bullet points for both pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic endpoints along the way. Sometimes this leads to new hypotheses that need to be addressed in subsequent studies, but being smart about what type of information is needed to be able to develop those endpoints, such as the pharmacokinetic components of it, can be done in an adaptive type design, as you just mentioned, Amanda, that can not only speed the development process, but make sure that you have basically the required information, but not just doing it because that was the way it was done before. I think we've gone a long way in helping to industry to address these newer strategies to achieve that endpoint. We talked a little bit about this already, about improving access. I wanted to maybe use this as a bridge point to talk a little bit about how our two major components within the GOG Foundation are addressing access. So I want to start maybe on the NRG side. As you know, GOG Foundation has NRG Oncology on one side that focuses on our NCI-funded processes, and then we have GOG Partners on the other side, all under one umbrella. And these then work on the industry-sponsored trials. So we have a big catchment here. So let me start with Vicki. Let me start with you. Talk about what is the NRG doing to kind of improve access for the clinical trials that are working its way through that system.
So I would say NRG Oncology has a very active health disparities committee with a great focus on increasing and ensuring diversity of enrollment in clinical trials. And I am very honored to serve on that committee. And even within the health disparities committee, there are also subcommittees focused on, equity enrollment related to race and ethnicity, but also thinking about rural patients as well as our older patient population. A more recent, I think, goal of the Health Disparities Committee is actually assigning health disparities liaisons to each of the cancer-specific committees like breast and uterine, et cetera, which that person will be there to kind of be there during the review of protocols, during the committee meetings. And then I think probably the most important thing is the Health Disparities Committee is kind of working with the principal investigators of the protocols that are moving forward to really assign a health disparities chair. And that health disparities chair is going to have expertise in equity and enrollment and is going to help with these diversity action plans. And they really are going to be involved from the get-go. So looking at eligibility criteria, coming up with the plans, looking at, what the patient population should look like for that trial. And then as the trial opens and moves forward, it's really also making sure enrollment is going as projected. And so I think that's going to be have a huge impact on our trials and ensuring, because like you said, Rob, before we always looked after, but this is to move from the get-go to ensure that this is going to happen. So, so that's just a little bit about NRG Oncology.
That's really great because, in our NRG Oncology, it's obviously a lot of that's focused on essentially investigator-initiated types of trials that can be run within the group. So that'll provide, education and guidance, which is really great for a young investigator working their way through the system on how to do this. Actually, even seasoned investigators to be able to adapt to the new requirements and also get some better ideas. A lot of this is, really is just imagination about what things have done. And I think you mentioned, one of you two mentioned about, maybe it was Amanda, about the, when you talk to the patients about identifying what those barriers are, sometimes we don't know what they are. And patients are the best resource for that, right? So learning, listening from our patients, and then bringing that back to a central committee, like you said, Vicki, it'd be amazing and a great opportunity. So that's wonderful. And I know you guys are both passionate about this whole idea strategy, and so what great mentorship you guys can provide for that process. Amanda, let me ask you on the GOG partner side, what types of things are we doing to help improve access and be aligned with the guidance documents?
I think, they're doing many of the same things that NRG is doing. So making sure in clinical trial design for every single trial that there's a diversity chair or PI for every study.
Every study.
Vicki, you mentioned that person has to be involved from the get-go, and the patients need to be involved from the get-go, because if you design a clinical trial that is going to exclude a group of people, or it's going to make it too hard for people to follow up, then we're going to end up with a problem at the end when we had all the people in place to prevent that from happening. And so, so truly thinking about the barriers as we're designing the clinical trial that would prevent us from enrolling underrepresented patients on our studies. And then also like thinking about when we enroll patients, like the Energy Partners is working with our clinical trial sites for people to truly know what their population looks like and what their enrollment looks like, so that as we pick clinical trials that we're picking industry, we're picking, institutions that have the population that we're looking for and have good history of enrolling a diverse population so that we can get the appropriate information from a trial enrollment. And then all of these events, of education, symposiums, helping our other institution partners know how to enroll a diverse population and what barriers they could be seeing that they don't even know about in their own institutions.
Exactly. That's so GOG Partners, for the listeners who may not realize, really serves as a kind of a site management organization to help industry to find the right sites for their trials. And obviously they're looking for ones that can open quickly and enroll well. So I'm encouraging everybody who's listening to do both of those things as best as you can, because enrollment is obviously the key piece here. But we also are trying to align with those diversity plans. Bhavna Pathuri, Dr. Bhavna Pathuri serves as the chair for our diversity team as well for GOG Partners. And, has become very instrumental in writing those DAPs or helping the industry write those DAPs and using our investigators like you, Amanda, and Vicki, to help, put those into motion and help them to help identify sites that will actually bring the types of patients that we're trying to get into the U.S. population. This, brings up another kind of topic that comes up frequently. When industry is putting together, a trial that's going to be global, they'll be looking for, diversity, and they'll think sometimes that identifying nations that have kind of an ethnic homogeneity will be sufficient for that diversity. And we've learned that that's not the case. We need US-like patients, and we need them to come mostly from the US. We're starting to see some adoption of European patients because they have also a fairly diverse fraction. And this concept now is spreading around the world, which is really cool to see, because now we're talking about diversity in Brazil and South America, as well. And it's just been a very kind of neat thing to see that now people are starting to pay attention to what types of patients are being offered clinical trials, and hopefully to get more diverse population for their enrollment. So this is great. I'm super excited to have this discussion today, to talk about how our major research organizations in the U.S. are tackling the issue of access and keeping in mind the enrollment opportunities, but also to keep that we have a diverse population in doing so. And we touched on many of the elements that now are being activated within our diversity action plans to provide the broadest opportunity to our patients. So I know we're out of time. There's so many more things I want to ask you guys. You're so smart and provide such insight into this process, but I know we have to conclude. But I do want to thank you both for joining to do this. The GOG Foundation, again, would like to thank Immunogen and GSK for their generous support of the GOG's Idea Commitment Initiative. For more information, please go to the website. You can visit this at www.org. No, www.gog.org/idea-commitment to join us in making your idea commitment. I do want to thank you both for joining today and providing your insight and guidance, and we look forward to more in this series. So thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.